Welcome to Bio Bits and Bytes.
Glad to be here.
Get ready, because today we're taking a fascinating plunge into the interconnected world of aging, our hormones, and, well, our incredibly complex brain.
That's right. We've gathered some really compelling research. First, we'll look at how our bodies change over time, those hormonal shifts.
And how lifestyle fits in.
Exactly. And then second, some really exciting new findings on how hormone cycles can actually impact memory.
So our mission today is to unpack these, sometimes complex topics. We want to make them clear, define key terms for you as we go.
And reveal some, frankly, surprising insights about how hormones shape our bodies, our minds, everything as we age.
Okay, let's jump right in. The big picture. Hormones changing as we get older. Where do we start?
Okay, so as we age, it's natural for hormone production to shift. There are a few key ones we should probably cover. First, there's menopause.
Right, most people have heard of that one.
Yes. So for our listeners, could you give us a quick definition? Menopause is that fairly abrupt stop in estrogen and progesterone production in women, usually midlife, when the ovaries essentially cease functioning.
And it's a really significant event for women, definitely. But today, we're actually focusing a bit more broadly, right, on the more gradual changes.
Precisely. The slower shifts that happen in both men and women. Which brings us to andropause.
Andropause, so that's the male equivalent, sort of.
Kind of. It describes the gradual decline in testosterone in men. And interestingly, this can actually start quite early, maybe in their 20s or 30s, and just continues.
Wow, that early.
Yes. Now, women also see a drop in testosterone with age, but their starting levels are much, much lower, maybe 10 times lower than men's.
So the impact is likely quite different.
Exactly. And because the drop is so much more pronounced in men, a lot of the research has focused there. So we need to be a little careful about, generalizing everything directly to women.
Makes sense. Gradual decline versus that more distinct shift in menopause. Okay, what else is changing?
Another important one is adrenopause. This is about the adrenal glands, the ones sitting on top of your kidneys.
Oh.
They produce less DHEA, or dehydroepiandrosterone, and its related form, DHEAS, as we get older.
Right, DHEA. I've heard of that one too. So menopause, andropause, adrenopause. What's the fourth?
The last of our big four today is somatopause. This involves growth hormone, or GH.
GH, okay. And that declines too.
Yes. The way it's released in pulses becomes less pronounced. And since GH stimulates the production of another hormone called insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1...
Then IGF-1 levels also drop.
Exactly. And IGF-1, well, it's involved in growth and development, kind of like insulin in some ways.
So we got these four major shifts happening. Estrogen, progesterone dropping off more sharply in women. Testosterone declining gradually in men and women, but differently. Less DHEA and less GH and IGF-1.
That's the core picture, yes.
And the research we're looking at really connects these changing hormone profiles to metabolic problems as we age. It's like a web, isn't it?
It really is. These shifts can kick off a whole cascade of metabolic consequences. For instance, having lower levels of testosterone, DHEA, and GH seems linked to gaining more fat.
Both kinds, like under the skin and the deeper kind.
Yes, both subcutaneous and that more dangerous visceral fat around the organs. And that, of course, increases the risk for obesity overall.
And it doesn't stop there, does it? I see things like decreased insulin sensitivity. Could you remind our listeners what insulin sensitivity means?
Sure. Insulin sensitivity is basically how well your cells listen to the hormone insulin. Insulin's job is to help sugar, or glucose, get from your blood into your cells for energy.
So if sensitivity goes down...
Your body has to pump out more insulin to get the same job done.
Really?
Over time, that can lead to high blood sugar and eventually type 2 diabetes.
That's really clear things. The research also flags things like high blood pressure and high triglycerides. What are triglycerides?
Triglycerides are just a type of fat floating around in your blood. Your body makes them from extra calories you eat that aren't needed right away. They get stored in fat cells.
And high levels are bad for the heart, presumably.
Right. High triglycerides, along with high blood pressure, high blood sugar, maybe extra belly fat. That cluster of things is called metabolic syndrome.
Ah, metabolic syndrome. Heard of that.
And having that significantly bumps up your risk for heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes.
So it really is all connected. These lower hormone levels seem to start a chain reaction affecting our metabolic health. And I noticed specific effects mentioned too, like lower testosterone and GH linked to less muscle and weaker bones.
That's right. Both testosterone and GH are really important for keeping muscle strong and bones dense. So as they decline, you often see muscle mass and bone density decrease too.
And DHEA, what was linked specifically there?
For DHEA, the potential consequences listed include more body fat, a higher waist-to-hip ratio, less lean body mass, and also a lower VO2 max. Plus, maybe an increased risk for heart disease.
Okay, VO2 max. Could you define that one for us?
Yeah, VO2 max is simply a measure of how much oxygen your body can use when you're exercising really intensely. It's a good indicator of your aerobic fitness.
Got it. So it sounds like these hormonal changes can really, take a toll on our physical abilities and health. But the research also stresses lifestyle, right? It's not just hormones.
Absolutely not. That's a critical point. While these hormonal changes are, well, a natural part of aging, how much they affect us is heavily influenced by our lifestyle, especially physical activity and diet.
So lifestyle choices can make things worse.
Or they can help mitigate these issues. They can be a powerful buffer.
That's good news. Let's talk about those lifestyle factors. Diet first. Caloric restriction, or CR, comes up. What exactly is CR?
Caloric restriction just means consistently eating fewer calories than you normally would, but crucially, without becoming malnourished. You still need all your essential nutrients. It's not starvation.
Just a sustained, moderate reduction.
Yeah.
And does it help?
Well, studies, mostly in animals, but some in humans too, show CR can improve body composition, more lean mass, less fat mass, and reduce obesity.
Okay.
And interesting, getting back to hormones, in obese men, CR has actually been shown to increase total testosterone levels.
Really? Increase?
Yes, and in obese people who lost a significant amount of weight through CR, they saw an increase in growth hormone secretion too.
Wow. So losing excess weight via fewer calories might actually help boost some of these declining hormones.
That seems to be the case in those populations, yes. Losing body fat seems to positively influence hormone regulation there. But, and this is important, the effect isn't as clear for people already at a healthy weight or for healthy older folks.
Ah, okay.
Some studies in those groups actually showed CR might reduce testosterone, so it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Right, context matters. And there was a warning about protein, too, especially for older adults doing CR.
Yes, absolutely crucial. To avoid losing too much muscle and becoming frail, older adults cutting calories need to make sure they're getting enough protein, maybe even a bit more than standard recommendations.
Good tip. Okay, so diet's one tool. What about exercise? We know it's good, but how does it specifically connect to these aging and hormone issues?
Exercise, both aerobic stuff like running or swimming and resistance training like lifting weights, is incredibly beneficial for metabolic health as we age. Let's take aerobic capacity, that VO2 max we mentioned.
Okay.
It generally declines with age, and that decline is linked pretty closely to changes in our mitochondria.
Mitochondria, the powerhouses of the cell. Right?
Exactly. They produce energy. And as we age, we tend to have fewer of them in our muscles, and they don't function quite as well. That drop in mitochondrial function is linked to lower VO2 max and even earlier mortality.
And how do hormones play into the mitochondria story?
Well, there seems to be a link. Lower testosterone levels are associated with lower VO2 max and also less activity in the genes involved in making energy in the mitochondria. And interestingly, animal studies suggest that giving extra testosterone can actually trigger the creation of new mitochondria. That process is called mitochondrial biogenesis.
Like building more power plants in the cells.
Pretty much. And there's also a hint that higher DHEA levels might be linked to better VO2 max, maybe because DHEA can be converted into testosterone.
I see. What about growth hormone here?
The link between GH-IGF-1 and VO2 max is a bit fuzzier. Some studies show GH might boost how well mitochondria work, but it doesn't necessarily translate into better overall aerobic fitness, better VO2 max.
Okay, so testosterone seems more directly involved there. What about bone health? You mentioned that earlier, too.
Right. Bone mineral density, or BMD, tends to go down with age, increasing fracture risk. It's a major concern.
And hormones.
The connection between hormones like testosterone, DHEA, GH, and bone health in older adults is, well, it's complex. The research is sometimes a bit conflicting, but we do see a clear correlation between testosterone levels and bone density in men who are clinically low in testosterone, and similarly between GH levels and bone density in adults who are GH deficient.
So it seems like hormones matter for bones, especially if levels are truly low. But exercise is key here too, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Consistent, lifelong exercise, both aerobic and resistance training, is probably the single best thing you can do for building and maintaining strong bones. It really helps slow down that age-related BMD decline.
Weight-bearing stuff, lifting
Yeah.
weights, putting stress on the bones tells them to stay strong.
Precisely.
Okay, so lifestyle, diet, exercise, corely powerful tools, which leads us naturally to hormone replacement therapy, or HRT. Is that the answer to counteract these declines?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a really important one. The current consensus among experts is generally no, not for most healthy aging adults.
Really? Why not?
Well, unless someone has a specific, medically diagnosed hormone deficiency confirmed by tests, routine HRT just isn't recommended. Let's take testosterone replacement, which is the most studied.
Okay.
The testosterone trials, a big set of studies, did find some benefits in older men who had definitively low testosterone. Things like improved sexual function, more lean mass, better physical function, some strength gains, better cholesterol, bone density.
So there are some potential upsides in that specific group.
Yes, and it's a big but, you have to weigh those against the downsides in the areas where it didn't help much.
Such as?
Well, some studies showed no real boost in muscle strength or thinking skills or insulin sensitivity. And then there are the risks.
Risks like what?
Potential for more plaque buildup in heart arteries, prostate issues, cardiovascular events like heart attacks or strokes, and also an increase in red blood cell count, which is called erythrocytosis. That can thicken the blood.
Those sound significant.
They are. And when researchers combine results from multiple studies, that's called a meta-analysis, they found a higher chance of prostate problems and high red blood cell counts in men on testosterone compared to placebo.
So not a straightforward fix. What about DHEA or growth hormone replacement? Any better?
DHEA on its own hasn't really shown much benefit for metabolic health in studies. Maybe some slight effect when combined with exercise, but it's not well understood or recommended.
Okay, and GH?
Growth hormone replacement can improve body composition, less fat, more lean mass, but it often doesn't translate into real functional improvements, like getting stronger, especially when combined with exercise. And GH has its own set of potential risks and side effects, too.
So the takeaway seems pretty clear. HRT might be right for specific diagnosed deficiencies, but it's not a magic bullet for aging, and lifestyle changes are generally safer and better.
That's a very good summary. Lifestyle is key. Now, speaking of hormones, let's shift gears a bit. There's some really fascinating new research looking not just at overall hormone levels, but at hormone cycles and how they actually shape the brain.
Hormone cycles. Shaking the brain. That sounds incredible. Like beyond just mood effects during a monthly cycle.
Exactly. Much deeper. Think of hormone levels fluctuating, like tides, and these regular ebbs and flows influencing brain cell activity and even their physical structure.
Yeah.
Researchers at UC Santa Barbara used advanced microscopy to watch this happen in the hippocampus of mice.
The hippocampus, that's a key memory center, right?
Absolutely. Deep in the temporal lobe, vital for making new memories, spatial navigation, crucial stuff.
So what did they see happening over the mouse hormone cycle?
They looked at the mouse estrus cycle. It's about 4 days long in mice, kind of analogous to the human menstrual cycle. And they found that when estradiol, that's a main type of estrogen, peaked during a stage called perestrus,
Yes.
there was a significant increase in the number of dendritic spines on the neurons in the hippocampus.
Okay, hold on. Dendritic spines. Can you define those for us?
Sure. Think of a neuron like a tree. The dendrites are the branches that receive signals. Dendritic spines are tiny little bumps or protrusions on those branches. They're the main spots where connections, or synapses, with other neurons happen.
So more spines means more potential connections.
Essentially, yes. More points of contact.
And this increase when estrogen peaked was significant.
Oh, yeah. They saw a 20 to 30% difference in spine density across the cycle. For one neuron, that could mean thousands of connections forming and then maybe disappearing again as the cycle changes. It really shows how dynamic the brain is.
Wow. Thousands of connections changing cyclically. That's amazing. Did they look at how this affects how the neurons actually work?
They did. They looked at the action potential, that's the electrical signal neurons use to fire and communicate, specifically how that signal travels, including something called the back-propagating signal.
Backpropagate.
Yeah, usually the signal goes from the receiving branches, dendrites, down the neuron. But sometimes a bit of that signal travels backward up into the dendrites again. And that backward signal is thought to be important for learning and memory for plasticity.
Okay, plasticity. Remind us what that means.
Plasticity or neuroplasticity is just the brain's incredible ability to change itself to form new connections, strengthen old ones, prune weak ones, It's how we learn and adapt.
Got it. So what happened with that back-propagating signal when estrogen was high?
It traveled farther back into the dendrites. The researchers think this might enhance the neuron's ability to strengthen or form new connections at those spines, basically boosting plasticity during that phase.
So high estrogen potentially means the brain is more changeable, more ready to learn, at least in that area?
That's the idea, yes. A really neat link between hormones, structure, and function. And they also looked at place cells.
Place cell, what do they do?
Place cells are neurons in the hippocampus that fire specifically when an animal is in a particular location. They help build our mental maps of spaces, essential for spatial memory.
Okay. And how did hormones affect them?
They found these place cells fired most reliably, most consistently when the mice were in the highest radiol phase processus. When estrogen was low, their firing was more variable, less precise.
So maybe spatial memory is sharper during that high estrogen phase in mice.
That's what it suggests, yes. The brain's map seems more stable then.
Fascinating. And this isn't just about mice, is it? There are hints for humans.
Absolutely. One of the co-authors, Emily Jacobs, her lab has found links in humans between the menstrual cycle and structural changes in the hippocampus seen on brain scans. So similar processes are likely happening in us too.
Wow.
And it's not just female hormones either. In males, testosterone can be converted into estradiol, the same estrogen right there in the brain. That process is called aromatization.
So male brains make estrogen locally.
Yes, and that estrogen can act on the same kinds of receptors in the hippocampus. So this hormone-driven plasticity is probably happening in everyone, just maybe driven by different hormone patterns.
It's still kind of surprising that reproductive hormones have such a direct effect on a memory center. Is there an evolutionary reason why?
That's a great question. The researchers suggest that having these hormone receptors in the hippocampus, even though it's not directly for reproduction, must serve some adaptive purpose related to learning and memory. Maybe it helped enhance learning during certain phases, giving an evolutionary edge.
It really changes how you think about hormones. And they mentioned this could have implications for personalized medicine.
Right. If brain function shifts across a cycle, maybe someday treatments or even learning strategies could be timed to align with an individual's hormonal phase for better results. It's speculative, but interesting.
And bringing this all back to aging, how does understanding these cycles help us think about the more gradual hormonal decline with age?
Well, even if the big cycles flatten out as we age, understanding how dynamic the brain is in response to hormones when we're younger gives us a baseline. It helps us appreciate that the brain is constantly interacting with the endocrine system. Seeing how it responds to fluctuations might give clues about how it responds to the more sustained lower levels later in life.
So understanding the ebbs and flows helps us understand the receding tide, perhaps.
Exactly. It highlights the complexity of how hormones influence our cognition throughout life.
It's truly remarkable, isn't it, how deeply connected our hormones are to everything, muscles, bones, even the very wiring of our memory centers.
It really is. And we've seen that, yes, aging brings hormonal shifts. That's inevitable. But our lifestyle choices, diet, exercise, they really can make a huge difference in how our health span plays out.
And this new research on cycles just adds another layer, showing how adaptable and responsive our biology is, right down to the connections between brain cells.
It absolutely does.
So this deep dive really leaves us with a provocative thought, doesn't it? If our brain structure and function are so sensitive to these natural, cyclical, hormonal changes, what does that mean for the more gradual, long-term hormonal shifts that happen as we age?
That's the question. It definitely opens up some fascinating avenues for future research into maintaining cognitive health as we get older. How do we support that dynamic interplay?
Lots to think about. Thank you for joining us on Bio Bits and Bytes for this really in-depth exploration.
My pleasure.